The
Oh
riverbank gave way
no!
under my boots without warning, and 1 second I was crouched over my transit, taking a reading on the new channel scar,
No!
and the next I was in the water. I want
Help!
to tell you that I
No!
fought it well, that I was
No!
calm, that some part
Help!
of my training took over and carried me through those first terrible seconds. I wasn't calm. The Cedar River in early May, 3 weeks after the worst flood Larimer County had seen in a decade, was not a river a man survived by being calm. It was brown and fast and cold enough to stop my lungs on contact, and it took my transit first, wrenching the brass instrument clean out of my hands, and then it took my footing, and then it took me, rolling me under and dragging me downstream past the collapsed bank where I'd been standing not 3 seconds before.
Fresh air!
I had exactly one thought as the current spun me toward a half-submerged cottonwood snag that would have opened my skull if I'd hit it square.
I understand!
I was 32 years old. I had come to Cedar Hollow to fix my father's 20-year-old mistake,
I need to go.
and I was going to die in the same river that had exposed it. I did not die. A rope did, in fact, save me, and the woman who threw it was already committing
Something's
the
wrong.
boldest act of horsemanship I have ever witnessed before I even understood what was
see it.
happening. Naomi Hart had been working the fence line on the bluff above the new channel when she saw me go in.
Help!
She told me later she didn't
anyone
remember
there?
deciding to do what she did next. Her body simply did it, the
Help
way
me!
29 years of ranch work teaches a body to do things faster than thought. She put her heels into her horse and rode the bluff's edge at a dead run, matching my speed in the water, uncoiling the lariat from her saddle horn as she went, and when I came up, gasping near the cottonwood snag, she was already there above me, rope singing out in a wide loop that dropped clean over my shoulders on the first throw. I have surveyed for railroad companies and mining claims across 3 territories. I have never seen anything like the economy of that throw. She dallied the rope hard around her horn and backed her horse up the bank in short, controlled steps, hauling me out of the current hand over hand of horseflesh rather than arm, and I came up onto the mud on my hands and knees, coughing river water, my instrument case gone downstream, my ribs bruised where the rope had bitten in. "You're the surveyor," she said. It wasn't a question. Word travels fast in a county with 400 people in it. "I am," I managed. "Was. I believe your river just relieved me of my transit." She looked at me for a long moment with green eyes that missed nothing, taking my measure the way she'd take the measure of a horse she was thinking of buying, and something in her expression was almost, though not quite, amusement. "Then you'd better come dry off before you catch your death doing arithmetic for the county," she said, and reached down a hand to help me up. That was the first time I saw Naomi Hart, and I want to be honest with you about something before I go further, because this story doesn't work if I'm not honest about it now. I already knew, riding beside her back to her ranch house in wet clothes with my teeth chattering, that within the week I was going to find something in the ground on her land that could take away everything that rope throw of hers had just saved. Cedar Hollow sat in a shallow valley in the Colorado high country, a town of perhaps 400 souls built up around a stage stop and a good crossing on the Cedar River, which had run more or less the same course for as long as anyone could remember, right up until the flood 3 weeks earlier tore out half a mile of bank and cut the river a new channel 200 yards east of the old one. The county land office in Fort Collins had sent me because the old channel had served for 20 years as the boundary line between 3 adjoining claims, and a boundary that used to be a river and was now a dry gulch needed to be formally re-established before anyone could file a deed, settle an estate, or sell so much as an acre. I had taken the assignment because it was routine work, and routine work paid, and I had not thought, when I accepted it, that the original 1866 survey marking those section lines had been conducted by a young surveyor named Silas Calloway, my father. He had been dead 4 years, and I had inherited his instrument case, his field notes, and, as it turned out, a mistake he had made 20 years before I was born into a position to have to fix it. Naomi's late husband, Amos Hart, had proved up 160 acres under the Homestead Act back in 1867, the year after my father's original survey set the section corners. The Hart claim ran from the old riverbank westward across some of the finest bottomland in the valley, land that grew hay thick enough to carry 200 head through a hard winter, land with a spring-fed well that never ran dry even in the worst August drought. Amos had died of a fever 6 years back, and Naomi had run the place alone since, 160 acres and 30 head of cattle and a stubbornness the whole county apparently found either admirable or alarming, depending who you asked. I spent my second day in Cedar Hollow at the county recorder's office, and my third day walking the old channel with my father's original 1866 field notes in one hand and my own fresh measurements in the other, and by the end of that third day I understood exactly what the flood had washed up, along with 200 yards of new riverbed. My father's original survey had misplaced the northeast section corner by roughly 40 yards, a chain error, most likely. The kind that happened when a green surveyor let his chainman get careless on rough ground or a compass reading thrown off by a vein of iron ore nobody thought to account for. 40 yards does not sound like much. 40 yards, run the length of a section line, moved the entire boundary between the Hart claim and the neighbouring parcel, and the neighbouring parcel belonged, as of 8 years ago, to Wendell Draven. If I filed a corrected survey using the true section corners established from the original government monument stones the flood had uncovered, along with everything else, roughly 60 acres of the Hart bottomland, including the spring-fed well, would legally fall on Draven's side of a true line instead of Naomi's. 60 acres do not sound like much either until you understand that 60 acres was the only water on that whole stretch of the valley floor, and a ranch without water is a ranch that dies slow through every August for the rest of its existence. So I had 3 days before the filing deadline the county land office had set. 3 days to decide whether I would submit the truth my instruments had found, or whether I would do something my professional oath told me was unthinkable and quietly restake the old wrong line the way my father had left it, and let a 20-year-old mistake stand as though it had never happened. I did not tell Naomi any of this the day she pulled me out of the river. I told myself I was waiting until I had confirmed my measurements. I understood even then that I was also waiting because I did not yet know how to say it to a woman who had just saved my life with a rope and a horse and had no earthly idea that the man she'd saved was about to be the one who ruined her. Wendell Draven found out about the discrepancy before I had finished confirming it, which told me plainly that someone in the recorder's office was talking to him, and he rode out to my camp on the 4th morning with 2 hired men flanking him like something out of a bad dream about wealth. "Mr. Calloway," he said, dismounting with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his life doubted he'd get what he wanted. "I understand you've found some interesting news about the old Hart-Draven line. I'm still confirming my measurements," I told him, which was true, and also a lie of omission large enough to drive a wagon through. Draven smiled the way men like him smile when they already know how a conversation is going to end. "Confirm quickly," he said. "I'd hate for the deadline to pass before the county has accurate information." He looked past me toward the Hart Ranch house, visible as a small dark shape against the green valley floor. "That's good water on that bottomland," he said. "Been wanting it 8 years. Would hate for a filing delay to be the only thing standing between me and what the law says is rightfully mine." He left a folded banknote on my camp table before he rode off. More money than I made in 4 months of county work, with no explanation offered and none needed. I burned it in my campfire that night, which felt satisfying and accomplished nothing at all because Draven did not need to bribe me. He only needed me to do my job correctly, and my job correctly done was going to hand him exactly what he wanted. I rode to the Hart Ranch on the 5th morning to tell her. I had decided, somewhere in the sleepless hours before dawn, that whatever I chose to do about the filing, she deserved to hear it from me, and not from Wendell Draven's smug satisfaction at the county fair. She was mending fence when I arrived, and she straightened up and looked at me with an expression that told me she already suspected something was wrong, the way people who have survived one hard loss develop a sense for the shape of the next one approaching. "You found something," she said, not a question. I told her all of it, the chain error, the 40 yards, the 60 acres, the well, the 3-day deadline, Draven's folded banknote burning in my fire pit. I told it plainly, the way my training had taught me to deliver bad survey news, facts first, no softening, because softening only prolongs the moment before understanding arrives. She was quiet for a long time after I finished, looking out at the bottomland that had kept her alive for 6 years alone. And when she spoke, her voice was steadier than I had any right to expect. "Your father made that error," she said. "He did, and you're the one who found it." "I am." She looked at me then with something I couldn't entirely read, and I braced myself for anger, for the accusation I felt I'd earned simply by being my father's son, and good enough at my work to uncover what he'd left buried. "That's a hell of a position to be standing in," she said instead, quietly. Both of them at once. "It's a mistake I intend to fix," I told her, though I still did not know, even as I said it, which direction fixing it was going to mean. I spent that night in my father's old field notes, the ones I'd inherited along with his instrument case, looking for anything that might explain a 40-yard chain error from a man who had, by every account I'd ever heard, been meticulous to the point of tedium. I found it near midnight, tucked into the back pages in handwriting gone shaky with age, dated 3 years before he died. Not a survey note at all, but something closer to a confession he'd apparently never intended anyone to read. He had known about the error, he had known for years, and he had chosen, deliberately, never to correct it, because the man who owned the True Section corner in 1867, before Amos Hart ever filed his claim, had been a land speculator named Cyrus Pell, who was systematically starving out homesteaders on paper technicalities to consolidate claims for cheap resale. The same ugly trade Wendell Draven now practiced with considerably more polish. My father had surveyed the correct line first, seen exactly what Pell intended to do with those 60 acres of water, and had quietly redrawn the corner 40 yards east instead, burying the true line under a chain error nobody would ever think to question, so that a young couple named Amos and Naomi Hart could keep their well. My father had not made a mistake. My father had made a choice and had carried the weight of that choice alone for 20 years, never telling a living soul, because a surveyor who deliberately falsified a government line was a surveyor who could lose his license, his reputation, and very possibly his freedom. I sat with that journal page until the lamp burned low, understanding for the first time in my life that the quiet, careful man who taught me this profession had broken every rule of it once for a stranger, and had let me grow up believing him simply competent when he had in fact been something considerably braver. I rode to Naomi's ranch before dawn on the 6th morning, the deadline's eve, with the journal page in my satchel and a plan taking shape that had nothing to do with fraud and everything to do with 20 years of quiet, undisturbed possession. "Colorado law," I told her, standing in her kitchen with coffee going cold between us, recognizes something called boundary by acquiescence. When two neighboring landowners have treated a particular line as the true boundary for an extended period, openly and without dispute, the courts will often uphold that practical line over a technically correct survey, especially where correcting it would work a serious hardship on the party who relied on it in good faith. 20 years is more than enough time. Every deed, every tax record, every fence Amos ever built assumed the old corner was correct. Naomi's eyes were sharp and steady on mine, and Draven's claim depends entirely on the technical error being treated as controlling, I said. It's a real legal argument either way, but I intend to file a survey that documents the acquiescence history in full alongside the technical discrepancy, and I intend to argue for the practical line in front of the county board myself, publicly, with my father's own error and his reasons for burying it laid out plainly rather than hidden. I am done inheriting his silence. You could lose your license doing that, she said. I could, I agreed. I'd rather lose it telling the truth about a man who was brave than keep it telling a lie he was ashamed of. She looked at me for a long moment in the grey kitchen light, and something in her face had shifted since the riverbank. Some careful distance she'd been keeping finally set down. My husband used to say the county owed us that water twice over, she said, once for the well itself, and once for every winter it kept us alive without him ever knowing why it was really ours to keep. She almost smiled. I think he'd have liked your father. The county board hearing was held on the 7th day, 1 day past the original filing deadline, which the board granted as an extension once I explained, in full and precise detail, exactly why the additional day was warranted. Wendell Draven argued his technical claim with the polished confidence of a man who had never lost anything he wanted badly enough. I laid out my father's original survey, the chain error, the buried journal entry, and 20 years of tax records, deeds, and undisputed fence lines all built atop the practical boundary my father had quietly chosen to protect. The board deliberated for 11 minutes and upheld the acquiescence line in full. Wendell Draven left Cedar Hollow within the month and did not come back. I stayed. There was county work enough to justify it at first, and then there was simply Naomi, and eventually I stopped pretending the work was the reason. I asked to come calling on her in June, standing at the same fence line she'd been mending the morning I told her the truth, and she said yes with the same unhurried directness she brought to everything, the directness that had once dropped a rope over my shoulders and pulled me out of a river before I understood I needed saving. We were married the following spring, on the bottomland by the well that had, in every way that mattered, always belonged to her. My father's journal sits framed now in the front room of the house we built together, not hidden this time, not buried, just quietly acknowledged for what it was. One careful man's 20-year-old act of courage, finally brought up into the daylight where it always deserved to stand. She still keeps the lariat coiled at her saddle horn. I still carry my father's instrument case, mended where the river tried to take it from me. And some nights, standing together at the well he saved and she kept, and we now share, I think about how close I came to filing the easy truth instead of the whole one, and I am grateful every single time that a woman on a bluff above a flooded river decided a stranger drowning below her was worth the risk of a rope.